presented by Makrita Solitei. So my name is Carrie Wilkinson, and along with Zach Nicholson, we are the co-conveners for the Illawarra branch of Renew. And we are so glad that you could join us this evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are watching from. We are talking to you from our living room in Wollongong. And on behalf of the Renew Illawarra Committee, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting on the unceded ancestral lands of the Wadi Wadi, Dharawal and Yuin people. So we acknowledge and pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and to country itself. We understand that many of you will be watching not just from the greater Wollongong area, but from your homes around Australia, and indeed many of you may be watching from around the world. So that's pretty cool. So I'd like to extend my respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations persons who are watching today, and acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and the world and their continuing connection to land, culture and community. Now, this is the first time we've been hosting a webinar for Renew, and we are very grateful for the assistance of our tech support. So Doug from Renew headquarters in Melbourne is controlling the screens for us behind the scenes. So if you have any technical issues during the evening, please use the chat function for assistance, and for most of you, I imagine you'll find that in the bar down the bottom. You can also ask questions during the talk using the Q&A button. So we will go through these questions at the end of Makrita's presentation. And we are very fortunate tonight to not only have Makrita to present for us, but we are also joined by 3 of her collaborators from the Illawarra Shoalhaven joint organisation, who will also be available for questions at the end. So I'd like to also say hello to Yvette Bars. So maybe if Yvette could give a wave. She's the Regional Program Manager. Nicole Parsons, who is our Education Coordinator, and Dr. Tillian Bone, who is the Academic Program Director. So they'll be there to answer questions, which is great. It is normal that we will get more questions than we'll have time for, so please be patient. Zach will be facilitating the Q&A, and we will try to get through as many of those questions as we can in the time available tonight. We'll also be recording the presentation, and that should be available on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So Doug will be looking after that for us. Thank you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you now to Makrita. So Makrita is a second-year doctoral candidate at the University of Wollongong. She is undertaking interdisciplinary research to understand and highlight the role of grassroots innovators working towards a waste circular economy in resource-constrained communities in both Kenya and Australia. So in this webinar, Makrita draws on insights from her PhD internship role at the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organisation, where she analyses manufacturing waste streams in the Illawarra and Shoalhaven region for supply chain and business innovation, a cradle-to-cradle concept. So thank you, Makrita. I'll hand that over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank you for having me here, Renew Illawarra. It's so exciting, and also to see everyone just stream in. Welcome. As Carrie has said, my name is Makrita Solitei. I'm a PhD intern with the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organisation. And today I'm very fortunate to have the support and to be joined by my supervisors as well as collaborators in this project, so Yvette and Nicole. Just before I can continue further on the project that we're going to be talking on today widely, I also want to echo what just Carrie has said and acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land in which I work and study in, this beautiful land, the Dharawal, Wadi Wadi and the Yuin peoples. I want to pay my respect to the elders, past, present and future, and to country itself. But more than that, I also want to acknowledge the support and the people who've helped me compile this research and go through this research, which is the Australian postgraduate research team, and in particular, Mark Ovens and Alex. They organize a program that connects PhD students such as myself with industry through a short-term research project. And that has empowered me to understand the practicalities that's required in a business setup. I also want to thank the Illawarra and acknowledge their work, the Illawarra and Shoalhaven Joint Organisation, in particular Yvette and Nicole, who have worked with me through these 6 months in this particular project. gathering data and, getting our hands dirty, trying to get as much information as we can. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Tillman Baum and Dr. Thomas Bachnell, who are my PhD supervisors, but have also been my mentors and psychologists during this whole process. They've had it all, the highs and lows of PhD and of project work. So just to give you an outline of what I'll be discussing today, I'll try and give you a project overview, basically what we were looking for, what led to that project, a bit of history and background and objectives that we were trying to achieve in this time. I'll also want to talk to you about the opportunities that these objectives can feed into, and from there helped us develop our research questions. Based on the broadness of this topic, we tried to define manufacturing and even just get what manufacturing is, because we went into this project thinking that we know, and once we got into the project there was like all this information and like, oh, we need a bit more direction and structure. So defining manufacturing to give us more structure into how manufacturing and construction is segmented in Australia, and why engineered timber out of that whole manufacturing and construction sector or umbrella. Why did we focus on engineered timber? The methods and methods that led to the findings we got, a bit of discussions in terms of what's next, scenarios, challenges, and definitely the next step, because this project doesn't end here. So just by saying that, I want to welcome you with feedback and constructive criticism, because as you can see, I don't have a conclusion. The research is currently ongoing. We do have a bit of suggestions, but we welcome any form of feedback, constructive criticism, as I've said, or if you have a better idea or you can see something that we haven't yet tackled or shared on, we welcome all that type of information on as part of the ongoing research. So just to begin, who is ISJO? So, and what are their aims? So the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organization is one of 5 joint organizations that were piloted in 2015. And they provide leadership, collaboration, and advocacy for, sorry, I'll just move my bar to the side, and they provide leadership, collaboration, and advocacy for the benefit of the region. So the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organization, among many of their core functions and optional functions, they deal with the regional waste program. So this is a program funded by the New South Wales EPA, and the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organization, or ISJO, tackle regional significant projects that are outside the scope of the domestic waste management. So currently there are no legislative drivers to encourage research or investment into the establishment of circular opportunities or end markets, such as product stewardship. There are no requirements for recycled content on imported products. And while there are significant social, economic, and environmental drivers for the avoidance of waste to landfill, disposal still presents an easy and accessible solution for residents and industry in terms of materials that do not have alternative recycling streams or in markets. So there's this pressure that normally falls on local government, especially in regional areas, in managing existing facilities and planning for future future planning, especially in terms of trending usage and disposal of resources. There's limited lifespan on our landfills and landfills across generally, with no prospects of approvals for future similar facilities. So currently, the only viable alternative to landfill is waste to energy, where resources are burned in place of fuel, thereby removing the ability to reprocess or reuse these resources, which resources here is waste, what is termed as waste generally. So whilst there may be one alternative, that may be one alternative, waste to energy, this project embarked on identifying far greater social, economic, and environmental benefits in exploring alternative circular economies. So through that, we were able to have a project aim, which is basically to look at real world examples of supply chain analysis and industrial ecology to value and identify to identify where where resources such as waste can be revalued. And what I mean by industrial ecology is basically the stages of the production process of goods and services from a point of view of nature. So trying to mimic the natural system by conserving and reusing resources. So while council services the community's waste collection and disposal needs, they don't have the capacity to investigate opportunities for reuse and reprocessing the resource currently going to landfill from industry. And likewise, most small to medium enterprises do not see waste processing, avoidance, or recycling as a core business. So then how can we work with them together with ISJO to create connections and models for circular opportunities, thereby diverting this waste from landfill? So we had a broad objectives while we started, and that is just basically to analyze the manufacturing waste stream currently going to landfill and identify opportunities to establish a commercial or social enterprise that can enable circular economy to thrive. And from there, we took a ton of events. So one of the things we needed to understand is what is the history and background of manufacturing and construction within the Illawarra. So there is a strong manufacturing and construction history within this region that dates back to the 60s and prior. So manufacturing in the 60s was huge in Australia, not only in Illawarra, but it employed over 1 million people and had 25% of the GDP, which is the gross domestic product, was contributed through manufacturing industry. Whereas in construction, there is a tree, I understand, called it's the red gold or the red tree, and it was used in construction and building of ships within the region of Illawarra and Shoalhaven. And that was actually a big market opportunity back in the day until they had to put some legislation around it. But other than that, specifically in Illawarra, and Shoalhaven, this region is the third largest regional economy in the New South Wales. So through its activities and support from other businesses, including manufacturing and construction, it contributes to about 18.98 billion Australian dollars to the New South Wales state. It has one of the 10th largest cities in Australia, and that's Wollongong, which is also the business and administration area of the region. And the workforce is known to have a trade certificate or higher and employs over 10,000 manufacturing employs over 10,000 people. So there is a high affinity for manufacturing companies and also construction companies to invest in the region or to come up in the region. So major companies in this region comprise of steel, mining, fabrication, agriculture, and automotive sector. A review and study across most of the manufacturing companies identified an existing circular economy within the major companies that have been in operation for a long time. For example, BlueScope Steel, which is one of the largest employers within the region, and they take back their steel. So they are a major manufacturer of steel products and they sell that, but they also have a buyback scheme where they do take back steel produce and put it either back into steel and push that out back into their markets. However, through different projects and core businesses that ISJO facilitates, they still identified that there are large volumes of manufacturing and construction waste diverted to landfill. For example, textile, mattresses, furniture, engineered timber, or white goods. And I bring your attention to the engineered timber because that's what this project will sort of talk about. I'll bounce around a bit, but hopefully there'll be a flow coming around towards the end. So that then, after understanding the history and the context and the background of this research, we then sort of narrowed our umbrella objective into more specific, because Illawarra Shoalhaven being a regional area. It's very connected. It's a lot of family business. It's a lot of people who've worked and known each other for over years. So our objectives then concentrated on connecting with local businesses who are keen to reduce their waste costs, identifying material types and volume of waste generated, as well as access viable opportunities to reprocess waste following the Ellen MacArthur business model, which is the diagram that I have put there to the right of the screen. So what do I mean by opportunities? By opportunities, if we divert waste from landfill, we extend the shelf life of the government asset, which is the landfill itself. But also we do meet some of the waste hierarchical preferabilities of dealing with waste, which is either to avoid as the most preferable rather than disposal into landfill, which is the least preferable. So that is a major opportunity for the government, like in a broader sense. In terms of economy, it does, waste-related activities add to about $6.9 billion per annum to the economy through sale of recovered waste materials. And it has been estimated to create about 9.2 full-time equivalent jobs per 10,000 of waste, 10,000 tons of waste diverted from landfill. And these opportunities then led us to ask, so what do we, so how then can we best address our research questions to be able to meet our objectives? And we came up with a few research questions. So again, using that broader and narrower objective, we wanted to understand, sorry, I will just have to move my little mouse. I'm seeing so many people on the screen, sorry. So we then led to the research questions of what are the largest volumes of waste products from local manufacturers, and what opportunities exist from those waste streams that are coming out of the local manufacturers to develop a more circular economy through them, with them, and through their waste product streams. How can ISJO facilitate that waste material flow? And do we need to create new industries? Do we use the current industries that are in operation? Or what other social enterprises could be established through this? So what would be required to establish this, and how could these materials from the council's bulky waste stream, which is another separate research project, but ties in with our manufacturing, construction, and timber projects, how can this council bulky waste stream feed into these opportunities so that we are practically killing I think it's one bird with two stones, is the saying. So for us to further understand how we can get into those questions, we looked at manufacturing separately to construction. And according to ABS data, we understood that manufacturing companies in Australia are divided into 19 major categories, from agriculture, forestry, and fishing, to other services, which include repair and servicing. So that was really, really broad. So based on this broad category of what is and what is not a manufacturer, literature further identified that there is a limitation in the definition of manufacturing companies and business, which in turn limited and excluded other key companies or industries that can be classified as a manufacturer. So for the purposes of this research, we then adopted the business.gov.au and Merriam-Webster definition of a manufacturer, among many, which basically highlights that manufacturing is the process of converting raw material into wares or components into finished goods by hand or machinery, especially when it's carried out on systematically with division of labor and with the intent to meet the expectations and demands of a customer. So following this definition then, this research determined that there is a gap in literature which mainly focused on major manufacturing sectors within Australia, which had a larger employment status such as steel, fabrication, mining, textile, or automotive sectors, and that significantly impacted the Australian economy. Despite the significance of these major sectors, this has limited exploration and study opportunities of smaller and growing or emerging manufacturing sectors with less employment numbers, but still have significant impact in regional areas, so to speak. Also, review of this literature on manufacturing sectors in Australia showed that most industries mainly focus on improving supply chain efficiency and reducing costs. Though this is a necessary and important step for companies, to still consider with the increase of demand for consumer goods in a fast-growing world population, behavior studies and trends show that consumption has actually shifted from buying easily available products to prioritizing products from companies whose objective is to control and reduce the negative environmental footprint and social impact, such as global warming and climate change. As a result, manufacturers globally have had to redesign its supply chain from push-centric model, which is giving the customers what they're making, to more a pull-centric model where it's listening to the customer and designing and manufacturing based on customer demands. Assessment and reassessment of manufacturers and manufacturing supply chain have then, so the assessment and reassessment of manufacturers' supply chain has globally have then needed to redesign that model and focused more on their customer, which has led to significant changes in operations of their business models in terms of water usage, energy consumption, and negative social and economic impacts, specifically waste produce across the supply chain. So more companies are implementing zero waste or circular economy business models. Initially it was to increase competitiveness in the market, but soon after, ended up realizing that it actually means cost saving and optimization of daily operations. So although this is the case for major manufacturing industries, smaller and newer emerging industries in the manufacturing and construction space have not been able, who do not produce similar volumes and have a more niche market, have been left out at the study once again, becoming more sustainable, especially in their waste sectors. So additionally, major companies' sustainable actions of waste reduction are difficult to implement in smaller companies and require resource-intense models that smaller companies at the moment cannot afford. So because of that, we realize that these gaps in literature, they just basically focus on bigger manufacturers and construction companies. Smaller manufacturing companies definitely overlooked. And the supply chain, especially within the Australian manufacturing sectors, focus on improving efficiency and reducing operation costs. Waste becomes a secondary consideration. And the growth of these smaller manufacturing companies have changed because of this consumer behavior and consumer demand. So they feel, studies show that consumers and customers can actually go to smaller to medium business holders because they can specify and meet those needs easily compared to a larger industry. So what about manufacturing and construction in Australia? So it still does follow the traditional manufacturing process of take, make, and dispose. And there is a lot of waste that comes out from that, just as I've explained in the previous. So therefore, to address these gaps from the previous slide, this research undertakes a small-scale project in regional New South Wales to identify current waste streams and pathways and opportunities to develop a cradle-to-cradle business model within the current supply chain. And this was also influenced by, one, having the rate of manufacturing, the rate of innovation in the manufacturing and construction being low, but having larger, smaller, medium enterprises to push out more product. And also there has been implementation of the Chinese national sword policy, or the China ban, and change in consumer behavior, which has also led to the shifts in marketplace and market demand and competition. So perspectives of competition actually are now being seen from a more green lens or sustainability lens, rather than that quick push of materials out to the customer. So why engineered timber? So the reason why this research ended up following engineered timber is because to achieve the objectives that we set out for the project, we initially reviewed manufacturing companies currently operating in Australia, and in specific, the Illawarra and Shoalhaven region, and the different value flows these companies are bringing into the region. The initial review determined the expected output in terms of waste volume, which was identified to be waste engineered timber. Further analysis into the larger volumes of waste engineered timber was traced to end up in landfill or being burned for energy use. The research project identified alternative pathways, which was waste engineered timber, the research project identified alternative pathways, which waste engineered timber, particularly medium density fibreboards, which is your MDF, and particle boards, which is PB, I'll be using those two abbreviations quite a lot, can be reintroduced as a resource at the end of life. So that because of the amount of engineered timber that was being pushed out, we decided to focus on those two. Those were the two major ones that kept on being sent to landfill or being taken back into, or being taken as waste to fuel. So some of the findings in terms of the construction sector. So I talked a bit about the manufacturing sector and their problems being traditional. But what about the construction sector, and how does the manufacturing sector and the construction sector sort of overlap in this MDF and particle board? Well, after that, giving you that snapshot and understanding that large volume of timber being manufactured is going into construction, and also understanding that the timber sector over the past 5 years has really come up due to the housing boom, literature highlighted that with more than 87% of MDF and particle board manufactured locally in Australia, there are limited resources and alternative pathways to divert this waste from landfill. According to the Housing Industry Association, there has been a total of 605,466 meters cubed of MDF and particle board from joineries installed in Australian residential dwellings between the period of 2016 and 2017, that financial year. And most of these installations have a 45 to 60-year lifespan. So literature further illustrates that during the first year alone, around 25% of the production is converted into waste in form of offcuts, machining errors, transport, and storage losses. So this is concurrent with a study that was done in 2009, which estimated that while processing MDF and particle board, waste equates to about 18% in board volume waste. And after 45 years, it is assumed that 99% of the production becomes waste. So following this study, Australia threatens to send most waste of MDF and particle board to landfill unless better alternatives are sought. So this figure here that is illustrated, it represents a breakdown of MDF and particle board value streams, so where they're used in form of value, and how they would end up to end up to waste of a resource from the dwelling industry of construction alone. So this is only MDF and particle board across Australia based on 2016-2017 data from Housing in Industry Association that was captured. And definitely there's still data from other industries that uses MDF and particle board, such as the furniture, that has not been captured here. And in the UK, currently, literature by a scholar known as P. Billy estimates that more than 50% of waste MDF and particle board is sent to landfill, whereas the rest is burned with or without energy reclamation. So for the construction and manufacturing industry sectors in Australia, there is significant economical impact from waste disposal options, especially with the annual increase of landfill levies, disposal costs, and fuel alternatives from diversion such as waste to fuel, which is increasingly becoming popular, though it's not sustainable environmentally or socially in the long term. So what, in terms of that data that we've gotten across Australia and in other regions, with the consumption and the trends of MDF and particle boards being on the rise over the past quarter century, there is need for circular economy alternatives and opportunities. So over 200 million meters cubed of MDF and particle board was produced across the world, according to the Forest Association organization. I think that is what FAO means. 2017, with over 80% of the production used in construction and furniture sectors. So the Furniture Industry Research Association was able to back up this data. The model here, the graph here, shows trends of MDF and particle board consumption over the years, where the closed blue diamonds being actual data, whereas the open green diamonds at the bottom of the graph being predicted values based on 1995 and 2016 trends on the consumption in the mid-70s and mid-90s. So from the graph above, it closely mirrors the increase in consumption of MDF and particle board in Australia end of 2016. So which estimated to have increased by 12.3%. So that's over 180,000 meters cubed of MDF and particle board to have increased and further increased by 40% in the coming years, according to FWPA, which is part of the Forest Associations of Australia. So this data was sort of backed up by the Housing Industry Association, because they projected that due to the Australian growing population, Australia will need to increase the number of homes built in each year between 2018 and 2015 by 20% to avoid the compounding to avoid compounding the existing affordability challenges that the communities already face. And although MDF was a breakthrough in timber and wood industry with regard of it being cheaper and more flexible building material, the Forest Production Trade Database estimates that over 97 million meters cubed of MDF waste globally which was produced, tends to be sent to landfill with limited alternatives of recycling or of circularity. So these global trends are actually mirrored in Australia today. So to identify if it's the same sort of experience that Illawarra and Shoalhaven region is having, we embarked on a research project that would help us talk more to what is actually happening on the ground. So based on this desktop analysis of international best practices and interviews with experts and local timber manufacturing businesses in the Illawarra and Shoalhaven region, we wanted to further inform the viability of implementation of business models with the highest realized net value and demand for recovered waste products, but also confirm what we are reading in literature, if it's accurately reflects what's on the ground. So we went out and we were able to look at online sources, so Google Maps, to sort of give us a snapshot of the area in which most industrial area is covered in the Illawarra and Shoalhaven region, map out a few of the registered business that stood out in Google Maps, but also use ABS data to understand who is registered where. And that was a bit misleading because it depends on where you register. So if you're a bigger company in Melbourne and you register, but you have a smaller medium enterprise here, the smaller medium enterprise ends up looking like it's in Melbourne and not really in Illawarra and Shoalhaven. So that was a task. But we also set out on a physical mapping exercise where Nicole, Yvette, and I sat in the car and went around the industrial areas of Illawarra and Shoalhaven and physically mapping on our maps the different kitchen, joineries, cabinet makers, and other industries or other manufacturing industries within the area. So we ended up interviewing 30 local businesses, talking to 3 major suppliers, having about 10 business and academic experts to talk to, just to understand the different ways in which circularity of materials is happening in different industries. We had 7 workshop visits or 7 visits of physical processing areas, and also a large amount of emails and telephone interviews, which we had to follow up later on. And these are the findings. Hopefully from here, I will stop reading my notes and I can actually give you a more interactive session. So based on our methodology, based on our literature review, based on what we thought we knew, the findings did actually shock us. So one, we identified that there are 954 manufacturing companies that are currently in operation within the Illawarra and Shoalhaven region. So this was not only based on our physical mapping, but we got this information from literature that was published in the regional New South Wales website. And based on the data now that we collected, we identified that 15% of these manufacturing companies are cabinet makers and kitchen joineries. So 147 manufacturing companies out of the 954 are kitchen joineries and cabinet makers. So these businesses generate about 42,042 meters cubed of MDF and particleboard every year. This waste stream is a clean waste stream. So these are just the 42,000 meters cubed of MDF and particleboard, a clean waste stream that comes from the workshop. So this is before they install the kitchen. This is before they clear the workstation and put it in the skip bins. So currently there are no disposal options other than landfill. There's no incentives for collection contractors to separate materials due to that lack of identified end markets. There is a small percentage that we can confirm of MDF and particleboard that's converted into fuel. However, we do not know that percentage, how big that percentage is as of yet. The market of waste to fuel is also not that large to make it viable for collection contractors to separate the waste materials for processing. So now that we had our findings, we sort of asked ourselves, what next? What are the discussions we can have with people across the board to understand what we can put this material into? And currently, one thing that stood out is there needs to be more work in the material phase of the project. So just establishing a marketplace for that clean waste stream. And in these early discussions, we were able to meet with owners of maker spaces across the Illawarra who have a small demand for a specific size board in which they can use in their educational spaces. But we also had discussion with, we tried to have discussion with people in the waste to energy industry, where process engineered fuel or PEF can be used for cement kilns or within the manufacturing process itself to power its own plant. So used by manufacturers to power their own plant with the waste that is produced maybe from the offcuts. So currently that stood as the highest net value of this waste material at the moment. However, I'm actually thankful for my mentors and my collaborators, Yvette and Nicole, because they're like, okay, fine, that is now, but what about 2 years from now? What about 5 years from now? And with the constant change of activities and circular economy, what more can we do? So we did have further discussions with academic experts from different research labs, and they talked about composite materials, which I'll talk about more in the next scenario, in the scenario phase of this report. We also talked about product development for construction through that composite material. And due to the bushfires, there is a need to rebuild the South Coast, which partly falls within the Illawarra and Shoalhaven region. So a lot of farmers might need fencing, and this could be an answer or part of an answer to the fencing. And more futuristically, just talking about MDF and particle board fibers, recycled fibers used in packaging, because packaging was one of the biggest problems that manufacturers are currently facing, or convert that fiber into filament, which can then be used in 3D printing, which can then be used back into packaging. So it's a bit futuristic, but it's an ongoing discussion, and the most exciting thing about that is that it can be done. It's just a matter of how do we get it done. And so that's then led us to this other direction of, then before we explore all these things, all these good things we're discussing, what do we need to understand with the MDF waste? And one of the things we needed to understand is that the MDF board itself has a toxicity, a chemical known as formaldehyde. So we needed to do a toxicity testing, even though there are about 2 major suppliers that supply MDF and particle board within the region, and have a similar E0 rating. So the E0 rating, when I checked, is basically the amount of formaldehyde that equals a certain percentage. So it's a standard that is set by the Australian government that regulates timber products and furniture products. So you can have a certain amount of rating, which is not harmful. It doesn't release a lot of harmful toxins as you process this. But we just needed to understand how that toxicity level will look at once we start putting it into different things and do more of a structural testing in terms of composite materials, which then brought us to this bit. So scenarios, once we understand that, and one is we can actually convert particle board back into particle board. So currently major suppliers are doing this across the country, and they confirmed using 20% of waste particle board back into new particle board. Onshore, currently, they're only collecting from their clients using strict guidelines for ease of collection and transport. And that's in the Greater Sydney region. And not we are yet to know of any suppliers doing that within the Illawarra region. So we suggested a business model for a centralized collection and aggregation system where we can divert particle board from landfill with the aim of engaging these suppliers who are feeding into this region to take back more of the particle board. A second scenario of a business model we sort of discussed is converting the medium density fibreboard back into fiber. So there is a UK tech that is UK company that is currently working on a technology that can take in MDF fiber and waste MDF and convert it into MDF fiber. So through some email exchanges, we were able to understand that towards the end of the year, they will be launching a plant and they'll be able to upscale and sell their patents to people who are interested in that. So one of those business models could capture this. The last scenario that I would sort of skim through today is interviews and discussions with experts, both in academia and business, have identified a mechanical process of enabling waste MDF and particle board or sawdust based on grinding MDF and particle board into a composite material in a 60-40 ratio. So 60% being wood and 40 being or 60% being waste MDF or particle board and 40% being a different type of material. So it could be glass, it could be plastic, it could be textile. And these are just some samples that you can use in wall paneling or house decoration, chairs or bench tops, which then allowed us to think of a business model which can allow partnerships between universities and small to medium enterprises to scale this as an option of diverting MDF and particle board from landfill. So in my, I think, second last slide here, there are some challenges to implementing some of the scenarios. Currently, the project include 5 different councils. So that in its own has its own complexities. Every council has its own ways of dealing with their waste supply. So that could be a challenge in the future, but can be easily navigated through coordination with ISJO. The role of government in establishing local circular economy currently is currently lacking in most of the literature that we went through and in most of the laws that are being passed. So policy implications such as procurement of recycled materials is actually not there. And also just having those unanswered scientific questions about formaldehyde toxicity in waste MDF is also a pending challenge before we can implement any of those scenarios, because it requires the mechanical change of the product. Tyranny of distance was one of the biggest challenges we had from suppliers and the cabinet makers or kitchen joineries. And also because there's competition between suppliers, there's literally limited information that is being shared. So waste recycling is not being a part of a cabinet makers or kitchen joineries core business area also seemed to present a challenge because they sort of don't understand, or well, they understand, but they sort of would not prioritize waste recycling in their business. So they can do other things, and this again comes secondary. However, we do have some next steps. One is to remove that uncertainty through material and chemical testing, also do a market testing of our developed product line. So we'll also seek to apply funding towards our pilot project, which includes partnership with relevant stakeholders, and also communicate a pilot project finding on how we can scale, and also the replicability of such a project in other regional areas that probably face the same issues. So thank you for your time. I'm so sorry it took longer than expected. We have our email there, and kindly feel free to contact us, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Makrita. And we've got about 10 minutes, or sorry, 11 minutes left on the clock. So we're going to start carrying out our Q&A section. So I just might start with Graham's question first, where, and I'll put this to you, Makrita, and I'll put it to the team. Graham's saying a lot of MDF used in joinery is lined with melamine or laminate. Have you considered how this can be easily removed so MDF fibers can be better used?
I can have Yvette or Nicole jump in.
Look, as far as we understand, I think it's a chemical process to remove the melamine. The only commercialised process that we've come up with during this research is in the UK, and it's still in the testing phase at the moment. But I do believe that it's obviously a certain temperature to remove that material.
Yeah, just to add to that, there is also a local onshore manufacturer of those products that have the melamine coating that are reprocessing that straight back into particle board, so new board, with the coating still attached, but they can only take a certain percentage of that versus virgin product. So it actually changes the makeup of the new material and makes it really quite hard. So you can imagine the fibres versus the plastic coating. The more they add to it, when they go to cut it in the workshop, it actually starts to, I guess, throw sparks off their saws and makes it a different material. So at the moment, it's only about a 20% recycled with the coating versus 80% virgin products for the small amount that they are recycling through a local onshore manufacturer.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for that, Nicole. And we're going to have, I think we've got a two-part question here from Jeanette. So the first part is, again, addressed to Makrita. So this is like we're asking, how is the proportion or amount of manufactured timber per household changing over time? Is there more or less PDF or particleboard being used in housing constructions over the last, say 20 years?
Well, currently, based on the data that we're seeing and the literature that's out there, it seems to be increasing. And there's literally lesser options because MDF is actually more flexible, and it's what is known as in one of the slides I think I talked about, it's one of the timber and wood industry best options at the moment. So we're trying to see how that best option can be redesigned or recirculated back into the system from design phase and also at the end of its life cycle. I don't know if Yvette and Nicole want to add more to that.
I guess the thing I'd add is in terms of particle board in furniture. Yeah. DF in furniture, we're seeing a lot more flat pack rather than timber or other styles of furniture. So not necessarily in the joinery business, but as Makrita was mentioning earlier, with the linkage back to the, I guess, the council household bulky type waste.
I suppose that's a really good segue into our next question, Nicole. So this one's from Kat, where Kat's asking, is there any move to modular joinery construction methods to avoid the generation of waste offcuts?
Yeah, well, I think Makrita found with even just speaking with some of the businesses and using the, what's the software that they're using now to do all the cutting?
The CNCs.
CNC machining, thank you. There's reduced waste in that regard by a really large percentage. So when it was hand cut, most certainly they had more waste. The offcuts that we're now seeing are no longer than sort of 6 inches by ½ an inch. So they're definitely trying to save the resources in that regard. But yeah, Kath, totally agree. In terms of the ability to modularise any sort of manufacturing so that you can repair, replace certain parts, that's what we've got to move towards.
I think I just had 2 things. It is demand driven. And the other thing is the boards come in a certain size. And it seems from our observations that there was an inch maybe being cut off the edge of those boards every single time they pulled one out. So why the boards are made in that particular size, unfortunately, we never got to the bottom of that.
Fair enough. Fantastic. And we have a question here from Ryan, which is congratulating Makrita on a fantastic presentation, firstly. But Ryan's asking, how does your work identified what cost savings circulating the waste MDF away from landfill gives the cabinet making businesses? So, less waste disposal fees, etc.
So I think part of our business model, maybe let me let Yvette actually answer this because she's the guru in this business model.
All right, I'll just have a little bit of a word to say. And I'm sorry, Ryan, if I upset you by saying this, but if the cabinet makers are creating a waste, then they need to be accountable for the disposal and the disposal costs associated with that. So basically our business model relies on that revenue. That waste will no longer be going to end of life in a landfill setting, but hopefully back into a circular economy model. But there is still a cost for having that product or resource be picked up and taken and put into something new.
Yeah. And maybe just to add on to that, it would be the business model will try and be flexible in terms of create competition by hopefully going cheaper than what currently is being charged to the businesses, maybe. So maybe that could be a win for them, paying cheaper to get their waste take away. I don't know. We're still figuring it out, Ryan, but thanks for the question.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Makrita. So we have a question here from Craig that Tillman, I believe, wants to answer live. So Craig's asking, have you heard of BioGrow, who use MDF as a plant growth material? Do you know much about it?
So we can see that. Yep, cool.
Microphone's on. Yeah. So just to check if my microphone was on. No, I wanted to answer live. I thought I might be able to type it in, but I personally haven't come across it, but I've checked them out straight away. So they're available in South Australia and Victoria. So again, the Australian South is leading the path here. I haven't come across these guys yet. But again, any material flow you're trying to redirect from landfill, there has to be a new material pathway kind of really cut out, and the incentives needs to be part of that supply chain. So it's how you kind of how you're redirecting it and how you incentivize the different players to redirect their waste. That's really the critical question to achieve better outcomes.
Fair enough. Now, and so we have a question here from Madeline, and Madeline is asking if is MDF and particle made from virgin timber, and is there a way of looking at the issue further back in the supply chain?
Oh, yeah, yes. So currently, yes, it's being made from virgin pine trees or pine wood, and then it's then processed into MDF and particle board. And yeah, part of this research is like working back into the supply chain to see if, before it becomes waste, what is the best way to prevent more waste from happening, either from working with suppliers or suppliers who have who have forests where they're harvesting the trees to make the product. But probably in the future, not currently, Madeline, because it's a bit of a tricky situation to navigate. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And we have we've got time for one more question, and we're going to address Ed's question here, where Ed is asking, is the industry working on the development uptake of lower toxicity adhesives in the manufacture of engineered timbers?
Sorry, could you please say that again? I feel like I'm having some issues with my ear.
Not a problem, Chris. So this is a question from Ed. And Ed is asking if is the industry working on the development and uptake of lower toxicity adhesives in the manufacture of engineered timbers?
Well, not any that we've come across, unless Nicole, Yvette?
There are some that are being utilised overseas.
Yeah.
Cost is the issue at present. So you can buy a square metre of MDF for $10, and that's what the cabinet makers are making. That's usually an EO based. So as Makrita was saying in the presentation, EO is the lowest level of acceptable formaldehyde. E1 is the next level up, and we don't use anything other than an EO or an E1. Yes, there are non-toxic based resins that are being utilised, but once again, it's a cost issue for a business at the moment.
Yeah, and once again, demand driven as well. it's not a commercially viable opportunity for somebody to take up at this stage.
Cool, sure. Thanks for that, Makrita, Nicole, and Yvette. I'm going to pass over back to Carrie now.
So we are at 8 o'clock, which is time for this session. We still have quite a few questions to get through. So if we didn't answer your question tonight, please, I know that Makrita invited you at the start to provide feedback and to get in touch. So there's a couple ways you could do that. You could get in touch with Makrita or ISJO. You can find their information through the website. Yep. Or alternatively, you can email us. So now that we are the new co-conveners of Illawarra Renew, we have a new email address. So if you would like to get in touch with us and we can pass on any further questions that you have, it's illawarra@renew.org.au, and you can also find a way to contact us through the Renew Australia website. So thank you so much, Makrita, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for joining us as well, Yvette, Nicole and Tillman. It was lovely to meet you. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight to watch our first webinar. It's been really, really great. So
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know what we do now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's it.
All
Thank
right.
you.